I heard you have a motorcycle nobody can fix. She said it quietly. No apology, just a worn toolbox in one hand, a bruise across her cheek that hadn't fully healed, eyes that had clearly seen something the rest of that room hadn't. Every man in that garage stopped moving because a 24-year-old woman had just walked through the door of a Hell's Angels chapter uninvited, announced and said the one thing guaranteed to make every experienced biker in the room either laugh or listen. They laughed first. They were wrong. If this story moves you, subscribe to this channel, follow every part until the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. The cold came early that October in Millhaven, that kind of cold that makes you reach for a heavier jacket, that settles in your bones and reminds you that something is ending. The trees had already given up their color. The streets smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. Those businesses downtown had already dimmed their signs by 7 in the evening. The highway that once carried truck traffic through the center of town was quieter than it had been in years. The Hells Angels garage on Route 9 was never quiet. It was one of those places that seemed to exist outside the normal rhythm of the town, lit up from the inside like it operated on its own time zone. Bleeding through the walls, the occasional rumble of an engine turning over in the back bay, us carrying through metal doors that never quite closed all the way. As people of Millhaven, the garage was something you drove past, something you didn't look at too long, something you had an opinion about without ever actually knowing. That was the town's way. They had opinions about a lot of things they'd never actually touched. After President Cole Harrison was 49 years old and had the kind of face that told a complete biography before he said a single word. He had a jaw like weathered stone, hair going silver at the temples, and so calloused and scarred that first-time visitors sometimes flinched when he reached out to shake theirs. He'd been riding since he was 15. He'd been running this chapter since he was 32. He walked through fire, literally and otherwise, and he'd developed for decades a particular skill that he never advertised, but that everyone around him eventually noticed. He knew people, not in the shallow way of someone who'd read a book about body language or watched too many crime dramas. He knew people the way a doctor knows a body, not from looking, but from years of paying attention to what most others ignored. Slight hesitation before an answer. The direction of someone's eyes when they were choosing between truth and performance. It would the tension in a person's shoulders when they were trying to appear relaxed. Harrison could read a room in 3 seconds flat, which is why when the side door of the garage opened at 7:14 on a Tuesday evening in October, there came in carrying the smell of motor oil and something else, something harder to name, something like determination wrapped in exhaustion. He was the first one to stop what he was doing, not because he heard the door, because he felt the change. Hailey Morgan was not by nature a person who knocked. Knocking implied you were asking permission to be somewhere, and she had stopped asking permission for things she had a right to a long time ago. She pushed the door open with her shoulder. Her right hand was occupied with a canvas tool bag that looked like it had been through at least one other life before hers, and she stepped into the garage with the particular kind of posture that doesn't announce itself. She wasn't puffed up. She wasn't shrinking. She was just there, present, occupying space the way someone does when they've decided they belong in it. As 24 years old, she was 5'4", had blonde hair pulled back in a loose knot that suggested she'd tied it back for function and appearance. Her denim jacket was faded at the elbows, faded that comes from use, not from a store trying to sell you the appearance of use. Her boots were steel-toed, scuffed, resoled at least once. Her jeans had a grease stain on the left thigh that had been through the wash so many times it had become permanent. Across her left cheek, yellowing at the edges, now maybe a week old, maybe 10 days, was a bruise the size of a hand. Her right hand, wrapped loosely around the canvas handle of her tool bag, had 2 knuckles that were healing from something. Not fighting. The shape was wrong for fighting. More like impact. Something hard had come at her and she'd gotten her hand up in time to stop the worst of it, but not all of it. 6 men in that garage, every single one of them noticed. But none of them said anything yet, because there was a hierarchy to how things worked in that space. Paul was the one who spoke first when someone walked in uninvited. Her? He set down the wrench he'd been holding. He turned. Her? He looked at her the way he looked at everything, without hurry, performance, with complete and unhurried attention. She looked back at him with eyes that were brown and direct and entirely free of what he expected to see. No fear, that was the thing. Most people who walked into that garage uninvited had at least a thin layer of nerves behind whatever front they were putting up. Oh, even tough people, even people who had dealt with hard situations their whole lives. There was usually something, a slight wideness to the eyes, well, before speaking, a fractional hesitation in the body. Hailey Morgan had none of that. She looked at Cole Harrison the way a surgeon looks at a patient, not cold, unkind, but absolutely focused on the thing that needed to be done. She said, "I heard you have a motorcycle nobody can fix." The garage didn't go silent all at once. Not silent the way a wave moves Cole first, then the man beside him, the pair working in the back bay, then the one leaning against the far wall with a coffee cup halfway to his mouth, and the youngest one near the parts shelf who'd been about to ask somebody a question. Like dominoes falling in slow motion. And then there was no sound except the faint hiss of the space heater in the corner and the distant noise of a truck on Route 9. Danny Race was 27 and had been with the chapter for 3 years. He was the one who laughed first, not a mean laugh, more surprised than anything, the kind of sound that escapes before you've decided to let it out. "Hurt? Sweetheart," he said, setting his socket wrench down on the workbench. "I don't know who told you that, but Marcus Doyle told me," Hailey said. She didn't look at Danny when she said it. She was still looking at Cole. "He said you had a 68 shovelhead that's been sitting dead for 4 months. He said 3 different mechanics worked on it, and none of them figured out why it won't run right. He said if I could fix it, you'd pay fair and ask questions later." She paused. "I'm here about the motorcycle." Another beat of silence. Danny opened his mouth. Cole held up one hand, barely a gesture, just a lift of 2 fingers, and Danny closed his mouth. Cole looked at Hailey for a long moment. His expression hadn't changed. It was the look of someone making a calculation, but not a math calculation. Something more like a read, a judgment call on a person that you couldn't make from data alone. "There's sent you," Cole said. It wasn't a question. It was him confirming a thing out loud so he could watch her reaction to his confirmation. "He mentioned it to a friend of mine who mentioned it to me," Hailey said. "Then found Marcus myself. He said, 'Come.' So I came." "How do you know Marcus?" "I fixed his truck." "Nice." He said I was the best mechanic he'd met in 30 years and he'd argue anyone on it. She let that land, then added, "I figured that was good enough to get me in the door." Cole studied her. "That bruise is recent." Hailey's expression didn't flicker. "Motorcycle," she said. "That's what I'm here about." The man whose bike it was, a veteran member named Ray Kowalski, 56 years old, a man who had rebuilt engines with his bare hands in conditions most mechanics would have refused, was sitting on a stool at the far end of the garage. He had been watching since she walked in. He had not laughed. However, Ray had a particular relationship with that motorcycle. Others, it had been his father's. He'd inherited it along with a box of tools and a handwritten note that said, "Don't let this one die." He'd spent 20 years maintaining it, restoring it piece by piece, keeping it alive through winters and cross-country rides and the kind of mileage that should have broken it 5 times over. And then one morning, 8 months ago, the bike had started running wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not a catastrophic failure, something obvious and clear. Just wrong in that subtle, deeply frustrating way that separates real mechanical problems from the ones that look like real mechanical problems. In a way that felt like the engine was lying about what was actually broken. The mechanics, 4 months, and the bike was still sitting. Ray watched this 24-year-old woman with a bruised face and a canvas tool bag stand in his garage and claim she was here for the motorcycle. He didn't say anything yet. He was waiting to see what Cole would do. Cole stepped aside. Not broadly, he didn't gesture toward the bike or make a production of it. He simply moved a few feet to the left, which was enough to create a clear path between Hailey and the corner of the garage, where the old shovelhead sat on its stand under a cloth. Cole's answer, not words, just space. Hailey walked toward the bike, her tool bag down beside it, not on the cloth, carelessly, but in the specific spot where someone puts a bag who's already mentally organized where they need to reach and in what order. The cloth off the bike with both hands and folded it without thinking muscle memory. Of someone who treated every workspace like it mattered and set it on the shelf beside her. Then she just looked at the motorcycle for a moment, not dramatically, not for effect. She was doing what good mechanics always do before they touch anything, reading the surface, the way dust collects, the way grease patterns form, angles that wear happens at, the things a bike says about itself before you ever turn a wrench. Danny had drifted closer. He was trying to look casual about it and failing completely. "What do you see?" he asked. "I'm not ready to say anything yet," Hailey said. "You've been looking at it for 30 seconds. I know. Most mechanics would already be. Most mechanics who looked at this bike didn't fix it," she said. "Without heat, without any edge. Just a fact. A fact that doesn't require volume to land." Danny, shut up. She crouched beside the engine. She didn't touch it immediately. She tilted her head. She was listening to something the room couldn't hear, or rather, she was listening to the silence of the bike, the stillness of it, the way the engine sat at rest, and what that position told her. Then she reached into her tool bag and pulled out a small flashlight, not a headlamp, a professional-grade diagnostic tool, just a flashlight, the kind you can get at any hardware store, and she started using it to look at parts of the engine that the overhead light couldn't reach. Kowalski stood up from his stool. He walked toward her slowly, coffee cup in hand, and stopped about 6 feet away. His face was unreadable. After about 4 minutes, the kind of 4 minutes that felt longer because the room was so quiet, Hailey said, looking up, "Who worked on the carburetor last?" Ray said, "A mechanic, guy named Briggs." "Did he replace the needle jet or just clean it?" A pause. "He said he cleaned it." Hailey made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Grabbed her flashlight. She leaned in closer. "Your fuel petcock is showing early signs of failure," she said. "Well, not failed, not yet, but the diaphragm is starting to degrade. Cold weather, the fuel flow becomes inconsistent. Engine gets enough to start, not always enough to run cleanly at certain RPMs." Ray said nothing. "But that's not the whole problem," she continued. "Because if it was just the petcock, Briggs would have caught it. Either Briggs missed it, which is possible, or there's something else feeding into the same symptoms, which is what I think." She paused, moved her flashlight to a different position. She said quietly. Cole, who had not moved from his position 6 feet back. "What?" "Ignition timing," Hailey said. "It's out. Not dramatically, just enough that at certain speeds, your load, the engine's fighting itself. Issue and the timing issue together create a symptom pattern that looks like 3 different problems, depending on how you test it and what temperature you tested it." She looked up at Ray. "Nobody ran it in cold weather specifically, did they?" "Tested it in the shop." Ray stared at her. Then he said, very slowly, "Briggs tested it in August." Hailey nodded. "There too?" "September," Ray said. "Early September. Oh, warm." "That's why they didn't catch the petcock issue clearly," Hailey said. "Diaphragm performs closer to normal in warmer temperatures. Alrighty, you'd see some rough running, but it wouldn't be obvious. The timing," she looked back at the engine. "The timing issue would explain why this bike felt wrong even before the petcock started degrading. I'm gonna check your advance mechanism. I think it's sticking at certain RPMs." The garage was completely silent. Kowalski, who had not shown any particular expression since Hailey had walked through the door, put his coffee cup down on a nearby shelf. He stood with his arms at his sides, and he looked at this 24-year-old woman crouched beside his father's motorcycle. "There?" He said, "You're right about the temperature. I told Briggs that." He said I was imagining it. Something very slight happened to Hailey's expression. Not anger, not vindication, More like recognition, the look of someone who has heard the phrase "you're imagining it" before. Not just about engines. You weren't imagining it, she said. Cole Harrison had seen a lot of things in his years running this chapter. He had seen men who talked for an hour about what they were going to do and then didn't do it. He had seen men who walked in with credentials and walked out without producing anything. He had seen people perform confidence and people who simply had it. And the difference between the twos was something you felt in the room rather than something you could explain in words. What he was feeling right now, watching Hailey Morgan examine Ray's motorcycle with complete concentration and zero performance, was that second thing. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't managing how she appeared. She was just working. And she was good at it. He walked toward her slowly. Red Keith, the way you approach something you want a better look at without disturbing it. Back tomorrow, he said. Hailey looked up at him. Parts. Where are you going to get the parts tonight? I'm not getting them tonight. I know where to get them tomorrow morning. I'll be here by noon. Cole nodded once. There's fair. She started putting her flashlight away, started folding the cloth back over the motorcycle. Cole said, what happened to your face? The cloth stopped moving for exactly 1 second. Then she finished folding it. She set it on the shelf. She picked up her tool bag. I'll be here by noon, she said. She walked out the way she'd walked in, without looking back. I closed behind her. Danny Reyes exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for the last 20 minutes. He said, who is she? She told you, Ray said. She's the mechanic. She's 24 years old with a bruise on her face. And she just diagnosed a problem that Briggs and 2 other guys couldn't figure out, Ray said. In 15 minutes, in the cold, he picked his coffee cup back up. I don't care how old she is. Cole was still looking at the door, with suspicion, not with doubt, with something else. Circular attention of someone who had just seen a corner of something larger, like catching a glimpse of the top of an iceberg and knowing that most of what mattered was below the waterline. The bruise, the way her hand had hesitated for 1 second when he asked about it. A bag that was clearly well used but clearly well cared for. The tools of someone who took what they did seriously. One for whom the tools were not just equipment, but identity. A thing she'd said to Danny, most mechanics who looked at this bike didn't fix it. Arrogance. Fact. Cole had been around people his whole life. He knew the difference. He said to the room in general, she comes back tomorrow, she fixes the bike, we pay her what it's worth, and we treat her like anyone else who comes in here and earns it. Nobody argued. Hailey Morgan got into her truck, a 2004 Silverado, with a cracked dashboard and a heater that worked when it felt like it, and she sat in the parking lot of the Hells Angels garage for exactly 3 minutes before she started the engine. Well, she wasn't collecting herself. She didn't need to collect herself. Calm in there. And she was calm now. She was thinking about the advanced mechanism on the shovel head and whether she'd need a puller or if she could work around it. Thinking about the petcock she knew, she'd seen a compatible replacement at the parts dealer in Fremont, and she needed to call ahead to make sure they still had it. Thinking about the timing light she'd need to borrow from, she ran through options, landed on 2, settled on the more reliable one. She pulled out of the parking lot and turned south on Route 9. In her rearview mirror, the lights of the garage receded for about 2 miles. Then she saw the truck, blue, domestic, a big-body pickup, maybe 5 years old, sitting on the shoulder of the road with its headlights off. It wasn't broken down. It wasn't parked in any normal sense. It was sitting there the way something sits when it's watching. Had seen that truck before. She had, in fact, seeing it for 3 weeks. She didn't slow down. She didn't speed up. She kept her eyes forward and her speed consistent, and she drove past it the way she'd have driven past any other vehicle on any other road. Her jaw tightened, and her hands, both of them, at her corners. Even the one with the healing knuckles gripped the steering wheel with the particular firmness of someone who is choosing not to react to something they very much want to react to. She drove home. She checked the locks twice. She sat down at the kitchen table with a notepad and wrote down everything she needed to get tomorrow. Shock diaphragm. advanced mechanism parts, 2 points set just in case, timing light, and a secondary list of things she'd need to check on the bike before she committed to the timing diagnosis fully. She wrote it all out in the neat, methodical handwriting of someone who had learned early that clear documentation was the only protection against being told later that you'd done something you hadn't. Then she opened her phone. She went to a folder she had labeled with no drama, a code, just a plain label evidence. She opened the most recent file. She listened to 30 seconds of a conversation she had recorded 2 weeks ago. Then she closed the phone. She put the notepad beside it. She sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of her house, a house that smelled like motor oil and instant coffee, and the particular kind of loneliness that comes from fighting something alone. And she looked at the ceiling for a while. Then she got up. She had parts to find in the morning. Doyle heard about it before breakfast the next day. He was 61 years old, a retired machinist who had lived in Millhaven for 40 years and watched it change in ways that both delighted and infuriated him. At the counter of Vera's Diner every morning at 7, where he could reliably learn approximately everything that had happened in a 20-mile radius in the last 18 hours. The news delivered in pieces by 3 different people over 45 minutes. Was this Cole Harrison's girl? Was how they were already referring to her directly, but that was how it went. In Millhaven had walked into the biker garage last night, taken one look at Ray Kowalski's motorcycle and told them what was wrong with it in the time it takes most people to decide what to order for dinner. Drank his coffee and smiled. He had not sent Hailey Morgan to that garage out of pity. He had sent her there because he'd watched her rebuild a 1,979 F250 transmission with parts she'd sourced herself in her own driveway. In 2 days, when the shop he'd originally taken to had quoted him 3 weeks, and a number that had made him slightly dizzy. He'd watched her work. He'd seen the patience of it, precision, the absolute refusal to cut corners, the way she'd explained what she was doing, not because he'd asked, but because she genuinely seemed to believe that people deserved to understand what was happening to their own vehicles. She was exceptional, and she was being swallowed up by something that exceptional people sometimes got swallowed up by circumstances that had nothing to do with their skill and everything to do with other people's cruelty. Marcus had not sent her to the Hells Angels garage because he thought they could protect her. He'd sent her there because he thought she could earn something she needed more than protection right now. Respect. The kind of respect that in a town like Millhaven could shift the way people looked at a situation. He finished his coffee about the blue truck he'd seen parked near the Morgan property twice in the past week. About Hailey's face, not the bruise, which was bad enough, but the expression behind it. The controlled, careful, exhausted expression of someone who had been fighting a battle on multiple fronts for months and was winning by the narrowest possible margin. He put some money on the counter. He walked out into the cold. Without his phone, he called a number. It rang twice. Harrison, said Marcus. She show up? Marcus asked. Last night, she was right about the bike. I know she was right about the bike. What did you think of her? A pause on Cole's end. Pause of someone choosing words carefully. I think she's carrying something, Cole said. Marcus said, she is. Another, how bad, Cole said. Marcus looked down the street toward the highway. Bad enough that I thought you should know she existed, he said. Bad enough that I thought she needed somewhere to show up and be worth something before everything else came to a head. Cole said nothing for a moment. The bruise. It wasn't an accident, Marcus said. I know for certain. She hasn't told me the rest. Not the kind to tell. He heard Cole breathe. She'll be back at noon, Cole said. I know, Marcus said. Here, fix the bike. That's the first thing. He hung up. He stood on the sidewalk outside Vera's Diner in the October cold and watched the traffic thin out on Main Street, about what a town does when it decides someone is small enough to ignore, about how wrong that always turns out to be. They arrived at 11:47 a.m. Noon. 11:47. Because she had accounted for the drive to Fremont and back, and the 10 minutes she'd stood at the parts counter making absolutely certain she had the right diaphragm for a 1,968 shovelhead before she paid for it. And she'd built buffer time into her estimate of noon, and then she'd made good time. She had her tool bag, a second smaller bag with the new parts. She had borrowed the timing light from her neighbor Phil, put it in his garage, and had asked no questions. Partly because he was that kind of neighbor, and partly because Hailey had asked him at 7:30 in the morning with the particular tone of voice that made people understand this was not a casual request. Reyes opened the side door before she knocked. She hadn't knocked. The parking lot was visible from the interior window, and apparently someone had been watching. He looked at the bags she was carrying, at her face. "You're early," he said. "I said noon," she said. "Not noon yet." He stepped back to let her in. Rikalski was already there. He was sitting on the same stool as last night, coffee cup in the same hand, wearing a different flannel shirt, but the same expression, which was the expression of someone who had learned, after 56 years of life, to withhold judgment until the evidence was complete. He wasn't in the main bay. Someone said he was in the office. He didn't ask about him. She set her bags down. The corners. She pulled the cloth off the motorcycle. She organized her tools with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times, laying everything out in a specific order that probably only made complete sense to her, but that made absolute sense if you understood the sequence of work she was planning. She looked at Ray. "I'm going to need to start the bike at some point," she said. "I'll let you know before I do that. Anything I should know about how she starts choke position, a particular sequence?" Ray blinked. Most mechanics didn't ask that. Most mechanics assumed they knew better than the owner. One of the things that made Ray distrust mechanics in the first place, the assumption that years of experience with motorcycles in general superseded your specific knowledge of your specific machine. "She's temperamental on a cold start," he said, standing up. "Prime the carb 3 times, not 2. Choke full until she catches halfway as soon as she's running, or she'll flood." Hailey nodded. "Held it." "Thank you," she said. Ray sat back down. They looked at Danny. Danny shrugged. She worked without narration. It was one of the things that the men in that garage would remember later, not the skill, which was increasingly obvious, but the silence. The purposeful, focused silence of someone who was in conversation with the machine and didn't need to perform their expertise for anyone watching. She started with the petcock. She had the old diaphragm out in under 4 minutes, clean work. No stripped screws, no fumbling. She examined the old diaphragm under her flashlight, tilted it, held it against the light from the overhead fixture. She carried it to where Ray was sitting and held it out. "Look at that edge," she said. "See how it's pulling away from the rim?" Probably 6 months ago. In warm weather, the material stays pliable enough that it doesn't affect flow much. Below 50 degrees, it stiffens, Ray said. He was leaning forward, looking at the diaphragm with the expression of a man who had just been given a very specific answer to a very long question. "Stiffens, yes. And the fuel flow becomes inconsistent, not completely blocked. Just inconsistent enough that under load, at certain RPMs, the engine's starving slightly. Not enough to stall, but enough to feel wrong." Ray took the old diaphragm in his hand. It over. He felt the edge she'd pointed to. "Nova," he said. Briggs missed it because in August, that edge still felt close enough to normal. And he was focused on the carb because that's where the symptoms pointed most obviously. She paused. "I'm not saying Briggs is a bad mechanic. I'm saying this one was hiding." Ray looked up at her. "That's fair," he said. "That's a fair thing to say." She nodded and went back to the motorcycle. Timing issue took longer. Tough, because Hailey didn't know what she was doing, because the advanced mechanism on a shovelhead from 1968 had its own personality, and personalities required patience. She spent 20 minutes on it with the timing light, running the engine in short bursts. She'd called Ray over for the starting sequence, and the bike caught on the first try with his method. This pleased him, visibly adjusting, checking, adjusting again. Paul came in from the office at around the 45-minute mark. He stood back and watched. He didn't interrupt. At one point, he started to say something, and Cole looked at him with an expression that didn't require words, and Danny found something else to do. Hailey was lying on her side on the garage floor at that point, looking up at the underside of the engine with her flashlight, and she said to nobody in particular, the advanced mechanism was sticking at about 3,000 RPM. Well, I've freed it up, but the springs are getting tired. Hold for now, but Ray, she raised her voice slightly. You're going to want to replace the advanced spring before spring riding season. I can source them if you want. They're not expensive. Ray, who had come to stand much closer than he'd been at the start of the session, laid down the specs, and I'll get them. I'll just get them, Hailey said. I'm looking for, I'll have them for you within the week. A pause. Right, Ray said. What do I owe you? For today. Think. I haven't finished, and I don't charge until the bike runs right. It's already running better than it has in 2 years. Then wait until it runs the way it should, she said. Give it one more pass. She finished at 2:23 p. She started the shovel head one final time, and she let it run for 6 minutes without touching anything. Third, she stood beside it, and she listened the way she'd listened that first night when she'd first looked at it carefully, completely with a quality of attention that the men around her had started to recognize as something specific to her. And that wasn't teachable, exactly. Or maybe it was teachable. You'd have to start young and care deeply. The engine ran clean. None of it was different. Not dramatically, not like a broken thing becoming fixed in a single obvious moment. Like a voice that had been slightly off-key for a long time finally finding the note it was supposed to be on. Ray heard it. He'd been listening to that engine for 20 years. He knew what it was supposed to sound like. He sat very still for a moment. Then he stood up. He walked over to the motorcycle, and he put his hand on the tank, not checking anything, not diagnosing anything, just touching it. The way you touch something you almost lost, quietly enough that it was almost private. There she is. Hailey reached past him and turned the engine off. Lodge held the silence. Then Danny Reyes started clapping. Their claps, not performative, just the genuine reflex of someone who has watched something go right after a long stretch of going wrong. Ray turned and looked at Hailey with the expression of a man who has made a comprehensive reassessment and arrived at a definitive conclusion. I owe you, he said again. What did you pay the other mechanics? She said. Them 3 of them together? Probably 800. They didn't fix it, she said. They charges between them and their conscience. It cost me $42. Labor, call it $150. You can pay me the parts cost now and the labor whenever you feel right about it. Ray stared at her. That's too low, he said. It's what it cost me, she said. I think is fair. I'm paying you $300, Ray said, and I'm not arguing about it. Hailey looked like she might argue anyway. Cole said, from his position near the wall, take the $300. Hailey. She looked at him. Something passed between them. Not challenge, not submission, more like the particular acknowledgement between 2 people who have each decided independently that the other one is someone worth dealing with honestly. She said, okay. She started packing up her tools. She was almost to the door when Cole said her name. She stopped, turned. Cole was standing with his hands in his pockets in the particular posture of someone who has decided to say something that they have spent some time deciding whether to say. About hers. You mentioned you know where to source parts, he said. A of bikes in the back that have been waiting on someone with the right contacts. Urgent. But if you had time, I'll come by Thursday, Hailey said. Cole nodded. Danny grinned. Ray looked at his motorcycle. Hailey walked out the door. The blue truck was not on Route 9 this time. It was in the parking lot of the Millhaven Public Library, which was 4 blocks from the Route 9 turnoff, far enough to be deniable, close enough to tell her something. They were watching her movements, not just her home, not just the family property. They drove past the library without slowing. She took the long way home, not evasively, not dramatically. She needed to think, and driving helped her think. This folder on her phone had 23 entries. 14 recorded conversations, 4 of them with the businessman himself. 9 photographs of damage to the family property, a window, a piece of fencing, a note that had been left on the door that she had photographed before removing. 3 accounts from people who had seen things they'd been too afraid to formally report. 23 pieces. She needed more. Not because she doubted what she had, but she understood, with the precise understanding of someone who had watched a powerful man use a small-town social architecture to insulate himself from consequences that was enough in principle, was not always enough in practice. She needed more, and she needed time. She turned onto the road that led to the Morgan property, her property now. They're in the hospital and likely to remain there, and she parked in front of the garage that bore his name on a painted sign that was starting to peel at the corners. She sat in the truck for a moment. She looked at the sign, and cycle repair, Est 1987. Her father had painted that sign himself. She had been 3 years old, and she remembered with the particular clarity that childhood memories sometimes arrive with, standing in the gravel and watching him up on a ladder with a brush of paint mixing with the smell of gasoline, how tall he had seemed against the sky. She got out of the truck. She unlocked the garage. She went inside and turned on the work light. She looked at the space familiar, hers, smelling like oil and metal and 35 years of her family's labor. And she felt something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but was in the neighborhood of both. She picked up a wrench. She set it down. She picked up her phone. She opened the evidence folder. She looked at the entry dated 3 weeks ago. A voice that said, among other things, if you don't sign the papers by the end of the month, the next conversation will be less comfortable than this one. Less comfortable. That was the phrasing. She looked at the healing knuckles on her right hand. She closed the folder. She sat down on the stool beside her father's workbench. There, for the first time in a long time, not because she was broken, not because she was giving up, but because she was alone in the place she loved most, with the weight of everything she was holding. She let herself feel exactly how heavy it was. Just for a minute. Then she picked up the notepad, started writing. There was a motorcycle waiting on Thursday, and she had work to do. Thursday came with a sky the color of old pewter and a wind that had teeth in it. They pulled into the Hells Angels garage at 2 in the morning, earlier than anyone expected, later than she'd planned, because she'd spent 40 minutes on the phone with her father's doctor before she left the house, and the conversation had taken something out of her that she was still quietly rebuilding on the drive over. His name was Thomas Morgan. He was 58 years old, which was too young for what was happening to him. The doctor had used words like progression and adjustment of care plan and quality indicators. Hailey had listened to all of it, standing in her kitchen with her coat already on and her tool bag already by the door. And she had asked exactly the questions that needed asking. And she had written the answers down on the notepad she kept beside the coffee maker. As she hung up, she had stood very still for about 30 seconds. Then she picked up her tool bag and she walked out to the truck. Because the work was still there. The bills were still there. The evidence folder on her phone was still there. The mortgage on the Morgan property was still there. 3 months behind now, because customers who had been scared away by rumors and intimidation don't unscare themselves just because you want them to. Everything was still there, and so was she. The side door of the garage was already unlocked when she arrived. Danny Reyes was inside, working on something at the back bench, and he looked up when she came in with the particular expression of someone who had told himself he wasn't watching for her and was now being caught watching for her. He said. I said, Thursday, Hailey said. I didn't say what time Thursday. He smiled at that in spite of himself. Paul's not in yet. He'll be here around 10. Then show me what you've got in the back, she said. Thanks, Cole mentioned. Danny set down his wrench. For a second, not dismissively, not the way he'd looked at her the first night. Like someone recalibrating an instrument after discovering the previous calibration was off. He said, come on. There were 2 of them. Early 70s Ironhead Sportster, that had been sitting for almost a year with an electrical problem that had defeated 2 attempts at diagnosis, a more recent touring bike with a transmission issue that its owner, a member named Garrett, who was currently out of town, had described. Left with the bike, as grinds when I hit third, and I've already replaced the clutch plates twice and I'm at the end of my rope here. Hailey read Garrett's note twice. Just place the clutch plates, she said. Garrett did first time, then a shop in Carlisle the second time. Did anyone look at the shift forks? Danny paused. No. Did anyone check the detent spring? Another pause. Sure. I genuinely don't know. Hailey folded Garrett's note and put it in her jacket pocket. I'll start with the iron head, she said. The electrical issues are usually more satisfying to solve in order. What does that mean? It means electrical problems are like arguments, she said, already crouching beside the Sportster. You have to go back to where it started, where it is now. If you try to solve it from the middle, you'll chase your tail for months. Danny looked at the bike. He looked at her. Is that what you think the other guys did? I think that's what most people do, she said. No judgment. It's the natural instinct. The problem is presenting here, so you fix here, except here is a symptom. The cause is somewhere behind it. She had her flashlight out, already looking. How long has the electrical issue been going on? About 14 months, Danny said. Give or take, and what does it do exactly? Don't give me what the previous mechanic said it does. Tell me what the owner experiences. Danny thought about it. Intermittent, total power loss. Sometimes it comes back on its own. Sometimes it doesn't. No pattern anyone could find. It happens at different speeds, temperatures, sometimes sitting still. Hailey was quiet for a moment. She was looking at the wiring harness near the headlight with the expression she got when something was becoming clear to her. Intermittent and no pattern usually means a connection issue, a component failure, she said. A failed component fails consistently, and the connection fails when something moves or heats up or vibrates in a specific way. She put her hand on the wiring near the main junction, and she moved it carefully, deliberately, while watching the area around it. Who's the owner? Guy named Pete. He's 52, been riding since he was in his 20s. What? He's not misusing it. Pete ever crash it? Anything that would have put lateral stress on the frame at the front end. Danny's face changed. 16 months ago. Bike went down. The speed was okay. Bike looked okay after. Just some cosmetic stuff. But Hailey looked up at him. Listen, 14 months of electrical problems, starting approximately 2 months after a crash, she said. Danny stared at her. The wiring harness took stress in the fall, she said. Enough to break anything immediately, but enough to compromise a connection inside the insulation. See it from outside. The insulation looks intact. Inside there's a break that opens and closes depending on temperature and vibration. When it opens, you lose power. When it closes, power comes back. Her pattern because the break isn't consistent, it moves. She put her flashlight away. She stood up. I need to do a full continuity check through the harness, she said. Take a few hours. I'll need a multimeter. I have one in the truck. I need to know if anyone has the original wiring diagram for this year and model. I can probably find one online, Danny said. I already have one on my phone, she said. I pulled it last night. Danny said nothing for a moment. Well, then he said, do you prep for everything this much? Hailey picked up her tool bag. I prep for everything I take seriously, she said. Others, which is everything. She walked back to her truck to get the multimeter. Danny watched her go. He pulled out his phone and texted Cole. Already here. She's already knows what's wrong with the Sportster. You should come in. Cole's response came back in under a minute. My way. Cole arrived at 9:47. He came in through the front, which he only did when he wanted to see the whole bay at once, before anyone knew he was there. It was a habit he'd developed over years, not suspicion, exactly, but the instinct of someone who'd learned that the most information came in the first unguarded second before people adjusted to your presence. What he saw in that first unguarded second was this. Hailey Morgan was lying on the concrete floor beside the Ironhead Sportster with her multimeter, working through the wiring harness with the systematic patience of someone diffusing something that required absolute precision. Lee Reyes was sitting on an overturned crate 3 feet away, holding a flashlight at the exact angle she'd asked him to hold it, letting her work with an expression of complete and slightly bewildered attention. Third man in the room, a quiet veteran member named Hatch, who'd come in at some point in the last hour, was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his coffee cup cooling in his hand, also watching. Nobody was talking. The garage had the quality of silence that settles in when people have decided, discussing it, that the work happening in front of them is worth not interrupting. The soul stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he walked in. Hailey heard his boots on the concrete. She didn't look up. "Morning," she said. "Morning," Cole said. "How long have you been here?" "Since 9. It's not 10 yet, I know." He crouched down beside her so he could see what she was seeing. She was at a section of the harness near the steering neck, exactly where you'd expect stress damage from a low-speed fall, or if you knew to look for it. "The crash 16 months ago," Cole said. "Yeah, nobody connected that. Nobody asked Pete what had happened to the bike in the 2 months before the problem started," she said. "Asked when the problem started. That's a different question." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Do you know to ask it that way?" he said. Hailey probed another connection point with the multimeter leads. A reading came back. She noted it on the pad beside her, the same neat, technical handwriting. "My father taught me," she said. "He said a machine doesn't lie. People sometimes lie about what happened to a machine, not because they're dishonest, but because they don't know what's relevant. So you ask backwards. Ask what the machine was doing before the problem started, not just what it's doing now." Cole nodded slowly. "He's a mechanic." "He was," she said. "He's in the hospital," she said it flatly, not dramatically. "You say a thing when you've said it enough times that the sharp edges have worn down to something manageable." Cole said. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it not as a polite reflex, but as a genuine receipt of something offered. "Tell me everything I know. I'm trying to run the shop while it's unclear. Hard to keep the customers coming in." She paused. She hadn't meant to say that last part. She could feel herself having said more than she intended. Cole said nothing. He filed it. "Got it," Hailey said. Up. She was holding her multimeter and looking at a section of harness about 8 inches from the steering neck where the reading had come back with the anomaly she'd been looking for, a break in continuity that appeared and disappeared as she gently flexed the harness. It up so Cole could see. "Right there," she said, "inside the insulation. You can't see it, but you can feel it when you flex the harness. There's a slightly softer section where the wire inside has broken. It makes contact when the harness is relaxed. It loses contact when vibration or heat causes the break to open." Cole looked at the spot. He pressed his thumb against it lightly. He could feel what she meant, the faint inconsistency in the harness at that point. He said, "Pete has been bringing this bike in for over a year. I know. Nobody found this. Nobody crashed the bike 16 months ago and then asked Pete what had happened in the 2 months before the problem started," she said again. The connection was there. It just needed someone to draw it. Cole stood up. He looked at Danny. Danny spread his hands in a gesture that communicated something like, "Oh, I know. The repair on Pete's Sportster took 4 hours. Because the fix was complicated. Splicing a broken wire inside a harness is painstaking, but not complex. But because Hailey didn't stop at the one break. Once she had the harness open at the stress point, she ran a full continuity check on every adjacent section. Because in her experience, a harness that had taken stress damage in one place often had microfractures developing in nearby sections that hadn't failed yet, but would. She fixed all 3. She documented every splice. She took photos with her own phone, not because anyone asked, but because she documented everything. Every repair, only finding every piece of work she did. Ray Kowalski had come in at some point during the morning and was working on something else in the back bay. He turned over twice to watch her work on the harness. He didn't say much. He had the quality of someone listening to a piece of music they recognized, but were hearing played by someone Someone whose interpretation kept revealing things they hadn't noticed in the original. When she finished and they tested the bike a full bench test, then a short run around the back lot the power held clean. No drops, no interruptions. Danny was the one who rode it around the lot. Came back with an expression that was not quite disbelief, but was close to it. 14 months, he said. Yeah, Hailey said. Over a year he stopped. Heard again, and it was a piece of wire. It was a piece of wire in exactly the right place to be almost impossible to find, unless you came at it from the right direction, she said. Oh, there's no shame in missing it. Pete is going to. Danny laughed. Exhale of something that had been held in too long. Is going to lose his mind. In a good way, hope, Hailey said. In the best possible way, Danny said. Paul had been watching from the garage entrance. He walked over now, and he looked at the Sportster, and then he looked at Hailey, and he said, what do you charge for 4 hours? 60 an hour, she said. That's too low, he said. That's my rate. Not anymore, he said. Sure. You're billing 90. She looked at him. I'm not going to argue with you about paying you what your work is worth, Cole said. Argue about a lot of things. Not that. She held his gaze for a moment. There was something in that moment that wasn't quite stubbornness on either side, more like two people who were used to being the most principled person in their respective rooms, discovering that the other one was also that person. She said finally. Plus parts. Plus parts. Good, Cole said. Garrett's bike is next. The transmission problem on Garrett's touring bike turned out to be the detent spring, as Hailey had suspected from reading his note. It was a smaller job, an hour and a half, the time she spent verifying her diagnosis before she committed to it, and she knocked it out in the afternoon while Danny watched and occasionally handed her things and asked questions that she answered without condescension, as itself something he noticed. Most people who were very good at something had one of two modes when someone less experienced asked them about it. They went into lecture mode, where the answer was technically complete, but delivered in a way that reminded you of your ignorance, or they abbreviated the answer in a way that left you knowing less than you'd started with. They didn't either. She answered Danny's questions the way someone answers who is genuinely interested in making sure the other person understands, not in demonstrating that they themselves understand. Mid-afternoon, the garage had a different quality to it, dramatically different. The music still played, their work still happened, but there was a new thread running through everything of this woman working in the bay who had, in a single day, solved 2 problems that had been sitting unanswered for a combined total of about 15 months. The quiet veteran member said to Cole at some point during the afternoon. Oh, she's the real thing, I know, Cole said. Where'd she come from? She's been here, Cole said. Shop on Fairfield Road. Her father's place. Hatch considered this. Miss Morgan's girl? You know him? I know his reputation, Hatch said. Old school. Did good work. He paused. But I heard he was sick. He is, Cole said. Hatch looked at Hailey across the bay. She's been running that place alone, he said. Looks like. Hatch uncrossed his arms. He recrossed them. He was working something out in his expression, the particular internal recalibration of someone connecting facts that individually meant one thing, but together meant something larger. She's got trouble, he said. It wasn't a question. Got something, Cole said. At 4:30, they packed up her tools. She had been in the garage for 7.5 hours. She had solved 2 problems and fixed 3 separate faults. She had answered every question directed at her. She had cleaned her workspace completely, not a perfunctory clean, the real kind, because she was the kind of person who left a workspace better than she found it. As quiet as she packed. Not the quiet of someone who was tired, though she was tired. Of someone whose head was in 2 places at once and was managing the split with precision. Ray came over while she was packing. You're coming back, he said. Not quite a question. If you want me to, she said. Want you to, he said simply. And I don't think I'm the only one. She looked up at him. Kowalski was not a man who said unnecessary things. The quality of someone whose words, when they came, were worth waiting for. Thank you, Ray, she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "I'm being selfish. I'd rather have someone good working here than keep losing months to people who aren't." She smiled at that, a small smile. There, a real one, the kind that reached her eyes before she could manage it. It was the first time anyone in that garage had seen her smile. Ray saw it. He didn't say anything about it, but he saw it. Cole followed her to the parking lot. Aggressively, he came out behind her at a pace that made it clear he wanted a word but wasn't forcing the conversation. Hailey heard his boots on the gravel. She turned before he spoke. "I'm going to be straight with you," Cole said. "Good," she said. "I prefer that. Marcus told me you're carrying something. Didn't tell me the details. That's not Marcus's way, but he said something was happening with the property. There's your family's shop." Hailey was still. She had her tool bag in one hand and her keys in the other, and she was looking at Cole with an expression that was not defensive, more evaluating. This look of someone deciding how much of themselves is safe to put in a room. "Being handled," she said. "By who?" She paused. "Me. Alone so far." Cole looked at her for a moment. The evening was coming in cold and fast, the way October evenings do. It had that particular quality it gets just before it gives up completely. "There's. You don't have to handle everything alone," he said. "Oh, that," Hailey said. "I also know that I walked in here 2 days ago as a stranger with a bruise on my face and a tool bag. I fixed your motorcycle. I came back and fixed 2 more today. That's 3 days of knowing each other." "I know," Cole said. "I'm not in the habit of trusting people based on 3 days," she said. "That's fair," Cole said. "And I'm not asking you to." He put his hands in his jacket pockets. "I'm just saying that if it gets to a point where you need someone besides yourself to know what's happening, I'm here." "Oh." Hailey looked at him. She had the look of someone who wanted to say yes and had been burned by yes enough times to be careful about it. I'll keep that in mind," she said. She got in her truck. Cole watched her pull out. He stood in the parking lot for a moment, in the cold, watching the truck's taillights turn onto Route 9. Then he looked up and down the road. No blue truck tonight. There. He'd been looking for it since Hailey had come in this morning. He'd noticed her checking the road when she arrived. He'd said nothing about it, but he'd been looking in there tonight, which meant either they'd given up, which he didn't believe, or they'd gotten smarter about where they parked. He went back inside. He called Marcus. "She was here all day," Cole said when Marcus picked up. "The real thing, Marcus. She's not just good. She's exceptional, I know that," Marcus said. "Tell me what you know about her situation." A pause on Marcus's end. Reluctance, exactly. More like the pause of someone ordering their words. That she's been approached 3 times about selling the Morgan property, Marcus said. "Last approach wasn't an approach. It was a threat. About 3 weeks ago, and a place to pick up her truck. I'd been keeping it in my barn for a few days because something had happened that scared her badly enough that she didn't want it sitting at her house overnight." Cole said nothing. He was listening the way he listened to engines, completely. "Her bruises," Marcus said. "More than she has now. Told me she'd fallen. She said it the same way she says everything, flat, posed, looking right at you. And I looked right back at her and I said, 'Hailey, I've known you since you were 11 years old. You've never fallen.' And she said," Marcus paused. "Oh, I know, Marcus, but I'm not ready yet." And I understood that. Let it go. Because she's right, she's not the kind you push. We'll tell you when she's ready and not a moment before." Cole was quiet for a moment. He said, "Man named Garfield Pruitt," Marcus said. "You know him?" Cole's expression didn't change much. Something in his eyes went very still. "Garfield Pruitt," he said. "Him? I know of him," Cole said. "He's been buying up commercial properties on the south side of town for about 2 years. A plan for a development corridor started at the highway exit, and he's been working east. The property is right in the middle of what he needs." "I know," Marcus said. "Miss Morgan wouldn't sell. He turned Pruitt down twice before he got sick. He's turned him down since. And Pruitt is not accustomed to being told no," Cole said. "Even a little bit," Marcus said. "He's got money. Connections. He's got half the town council in his pocket one way or another. Got the particular attitude of a man who has always gotten what he wants by applying enough pressure to the right places. Cole was quiet. Evidence, Marcus said. At least she told me she does. She said she's been collecting it, but she hasn't done anything with it. Yet I think she's waiting until she has enough that it can't be dismissed. How long can she wait? Cole said. Not long, Marcus said. The mortgage is 3 months behind. If she loses customers for another 6 weeks, she'll have to make decisions about the property that she doesn't want to make. And Pruitt knows that. He's patient. He doesn't need to force it when the pressure of circumstances will do the job for him. Cole put his hand flat on the workbench in front of him, looked at Ray's motorcycle. The one Hailey had fixed 2 nights ago. It was one that's running clean for the first time in months. Marcus, he said, the customers that were scared away, they're reversible. A pause. What are you thinking? Marcus said. Think about what she needs. Right now, Cole said. A peace. She doesn't need someone to fight her fight. She made that pretty clear. Maybe what she needs is for the narrative about her to change. Hours. In town. Because if Pruitt's been spreading rumors, and it sounds like he has, then part of what's kept customers away is that people have a story in their head about her that isn't true. What's the story he put out? Marcus said quietly. Oh, yet, Cole said. But I'm going to find out. What he found out over the next 2 days through the particular intelligence network that exists in every small town, but tends to flow more freely towards someone like Cole Harrison than toward most, was this. Garfield Pruitt was 61 years old. He had grown up poor in Millhaven, gotten rich through a combination of genuine business intelligence and a complete indifference to the line between hard dealing and dishonest dealing, and had spent the last decade reconstructing himself publicly as a civic benefactor, the man who brought development, the man who created jobs, the man who modernized a town that was stuck in the past. He sat on 2 nonprofit boards. He had his name on the new wing of the public library. He was by almost every public account a success story, but account was different. Cole had learned 3 separate sources who each spoke to him individually and each insisted on not being identified. Pruitt had a consistent pattern in property acquisition. Approach he offered. He waited. If the answer remained no, pressure began quiet at first, then louder. Rumors, interference with business relationships, and at least 2 previous cases damage to property that was never officially attributed to him, but that had the unmistakable logic of someone making a point. Thomas Morgan had stood up to him twice, and then Thomas Morgan had gotten sick. And his 24-year-old daughter had stood up to him once. And the 3rd time, Pruitt had apparently decided the conversation needed to be physical. Cole sat with all of this for 1 full evening. He sat with it the way he sat with hard mechanical problems, not reacting, just absorbing, letting the full shape of it become clear before he decided what it required. What it required, he concluded, was not a confrontation with Pruitt. Confrontation was what Pruitt wanted. Pruitt had been expecting it since Hailey walked into the biker garage, probably already building a narrative. The bikers threaten me. The bikers are harassing me. They're protecting one of their own. Narrative Pruitt was very good at, and it would hurt Hailey more than it hurt him. What it required was something different. What it required was for the truth to become visible. Cole showed up at Morgan's Auto and Cycle Repair on a Saturday morning. Ahead, he came alone. He drove his own truck, his motorcycle. This was deliberate because a man showing up in a truck is a man paying a visit. A man showing up on a Hell's Angels motorcycle is a statement, and this was not the moment for a statement. He pulled in and parked. He was inside. He could hear the radio through the walls, something country, the kind with actual steel guitar. He knocked on the door frame of the open bay entrance. It was under the hood of a sedan. She came up with a grease rag in her hand and looked at him with the same direct, assessing look she'd given him the first night. Cole, she said, surprised, not unwelcoming, just acknowledging. To you, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached over and turned the radio down. I know what Pruitt has been doing, Cole said. Everything, but enough. Her expression didn't change. Something shifted in it, the very slight shift of someone who has been braced against a thing for a long time and has just felt the first indication that they might not be braced alone. Much do you know? She said. The property situation, our pressure campaign, the two previous properties. What happened 3 weeks ago? He paused. I don't know the specifics of 3 weeks ago, only that you had bruises and you called them something they weren't. Hailey set the grease rag on the fender of the sedan, at the floor for a moment, not in shame, but in defeat. More like someone finding the floor useful to look at while they decide something. Then she looked up. They sent 2 men, she said. It was 10:30 at night. I was locking up. They didn't say who sent them. They didn't need to. She paused, and the pause was the first crack in the composure. A break, just a half second of something raw showing through. They said if I loved my father, think about what stress does to a sick man. And whether a sick man in a hospital needs to hear that his daughter is fighting a losing battle. Cole said nothing. He held very still. I told them to get off my property, Hailey said. On the left, grabbed my arm. I pulled away. He grabbed harder. My hand caught the door frame when I got loose. She looked at her knuckles healed now. That was the hand. And the bruise, Cole said, on the right swung at me when I started yelling. My arm up in time, she said it. Factually, they left after that. Inside, and I threw up from adrenaline. And then I sat down and I wrote down everything they said, word for word, while I could still remember exactly. I already had the recording running. I'd started the recording the moment I saw them in the lot. Their faces on my property camera. Cole looked at her. You have them on camera, he said. I've had cameras on the property for 4 months, she said. Since the second time Pruitt approached me and I realized he wasn't taking no for an answer. I have everything, Cole. I have 26 pieces of documentation recordings, paragraphs, written accounts, camera footage. I have a conversation where Pruitt told me directly that if I didn't sign the papers by the end of October, he'd make sure I lost everything I was trying to protect. October, Cole said. October, Hailey said. The two of them looked at each other across the open bay of Morgan's auto and cycle repair, with the smell of oil and metal around them, and the cold coming in through the open door. I'm ready, she said. I've been waiting until I had enough that he couldn't make it disappear. I think I have enough. I was going to go to the county attorney's office next week. She paused. I've been doing it alone, and doing things alone is another pause. Lot. You don't have to do it alone, Cole said. Not the next part. Hailey looked at him. The evaluating look. The look of someone who has been burned enough times to measure twice. What does your involvement look like? She said. Be specific. If it looks like a group of bikers showing up and making threats, that's the worst thing that can happen for me right now. That's exactly what Pruitt wants. He'll turn it into the story where I'm not a woman trying to save her father's business. I'm a woman who weaponized a gang to intimidate a businessman. I can't give him that. Cole nodded. That's not what it looks like, he said. What does it look like? Cole said. It looks like witnesses. I've been watching you work for 2 weeks, who can say clearly and publicly what they've seen. And it looks like connections to the kind of attorney who takes cases like yours and wins them. Hailey was quiet. Not fighters, Cole said. I mean, we can be. That's not what this needs. This needs the truth in a room where people are paying attention. The truth. We can help you get it in the room. Hailey was still for a long moment. Outside, the wind moved through the trees that lined the property, and somewhere down the road a car passed, and its engine sound faded into distance. Her phone was on the workbench beside her. The evidence folder had 26 entries. She looked at Cole. I have a meeting with the county attorney's office on Tuesday, she said. I was going to go alone. Go with a full account of what you have, Cole said. All 26 pieces. And go knowing that there are people in this town who will stand up and say they watched you work and they know who you are. You'd do that, she said. I have a question. Ray Kowalski would do that, Cole said. Ray doesn't do anything he doesn't mean. And if Ray goes, Hatch goes. And if Hatch goes, he stopped. You've got more people than you think. Here's Hailey. You've just been alone long enough that you've forgotten how to count them. Something crossed her face then. Something she didn't manage in time, not the small smile from the other day. Older and more complicated, the look of someone who has held something together for so long that the first real offer of help lands not like relief, but like grief. Because it reminds you of exactly how long you've been holding. She turned away from him for a moment. She picked up the grease rag and set it down again, not because she needed to, but because her hands needed something to do. When she turned back, her expression was composed. She said. Tuesday, Cole said. I'll call you Monday with the time, she said. Oh, he nodded. He turned to leave. He was at the bay entrance when she said, Cole. He stopped. Turned back. The bike, she said. There's Ray's bike. That was the first time in a long time that something went the way it was supposed to go. She paused. Oz had the quality of something real in it. Well, I needed that more than I knew. Cole looked at her across the length of the bay. Me too, he said. He walked out into the cold. Behind him, Carol came back up. Steel guitar, old and honest, moving through the walls of the garage that her father had built and that she was not going to let anyone take. Not now. Not after everything it had cost to still be standing in it. They came the way hard weeks always end not with resolution, but with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been running on adrenaline long enough that their body has started sending invoices. He was at the garage by 7, not Morgan's garage, the Hells Angels garage on Route 9. He had called Sunday evening and said Pete wanted to come in and hear about his Sportster directly from her. And Pete was a man who worked early shifts and could only come before 8. She'd said fine without hesitating because she didn't hesitate about work. What was the one thing in her life right now that behaved the way she expected it to. Pete was 52 and had the particular quality of a man who had spent 30 years doing physical labor and was still surprised every morning his body reminded him of it. He came in at 7:15 with his jacket collar up and a coffee he'd clearly just bought somewhere, and he looked at his Sportster the way a person looks at something they'd half given up on. They walked him through it. Not quickly, deliberately. Oh, the way she did everything. She showed him the section of harness she'd spliced. She showed him the 2 secondary fractures she'd found and fixed before he could develop new problems in 6 months. She explained the crash connection and why the timeline made sense. But let him ask questions, and he asked 3 good ones. And she answered all 3 completely. When she was done, Pete stood with his coffee cup in both hands, and he looked at her with an expression that had several layers to it, gratitude on top, something more complicated underneath. I owe you an apology, he said. They looked at him. For what? I heard things about you, Pete said. Their town before you started coming in here. And I believed some of it. Not proud of that. The garage was quiet. Danny was in the back. Cole was in the office. It was just the 2 of them in the main bay with the Sportster between them. What did you hear? Hailey said. Pete looked uncomfortable in the way of a man who knows he has to say an unpleasant thing and can't find a way to soften it that doesn't make it worse. His business was failing because of the way you'd been running it. That you'd driven off customers, that you weren't, that the quality of work wasn't there. He stopped. I heard. Hailey was still. From who, she said. This was even. Carefully even. More than one person, Pete said. It was in the air. The way things get in a small town. You hear it enough times from enough different directions, and you stop questioning where it started. You stop questioning where it started, Hailey said quietly. Pete looked at the floor. I'm sorry, Hailey. I should have come to you directly. I should have found out for myself instead of just listening. Hailey looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, Pete, how many people do you think heard the same things and didn't come in here to apologize? He looked up. I'm not saying that to make you feel worse, she said. Rodgers, I'm saying it because I need to understand the scale of it. Because what you're describing isn't gossip. What you're describing is a coordinated effort to destroy a business's reputation. The way that works is if enough people hear it from enough directions that it starts to feel like common knowledge. Pete stared at her. Something was shifting in his expression, the shift of a man who came in thinking he was apologizing for a personal failing and was now beginning to understand he'd been a piece of something larger. Who would do that? He said. Someone who wants me off a piece of property, Hailey said. Someone who's been trying to buy that property for 2 years and who ran out of patience when I kept saying no. Pete was quiet for a moment. Then he said very quietly, Pruitt. Hailey looked at him and said the name. You know him? She said. I know what happened to Bill Delaney, Pete said. 3 years ago. Bill had that hardware property on Commerce Street that Pruitt wanted for the development corridor. All right, no. 6 months later, Bill's business had lost half its accounts, and his lease was being contested, and he ended up selling just to stop the bleeding. Pete's jaw tightened. Always wondered how it happened so fast, how a solid business fell apart that quickly. He looked at Hailey. I'm wondering if I'm looking at how. The weight of that landed in the room, and neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Pete said, what do you need? I need people to tell the truth about what they saw. And when, Hailey said, I'm going to the county attorney's office tomorrow. Documentation. But documentation is stronger when it matches what people actually witnessed. Pete put his coffee cup down on the bench. Write down what you need from me, he said. I'll sign whatever I can sign. Cole was in the doorway of the office. He had heard most of it. He didn't say anything about it. When Pete left, Pete shook Hailey's hand on his way out. A little handshake, the kind that means something, but he met Hailey's eyes across the bay, and the look between them confirmed what they were both thinking. It hadn't just intimidated Hailey. He'd run a quiet, sustained campaign to hollow out her reputation before she even knew it was happening. A campaign that's almost impossible to fight directly because it has no face, no document, no single moment you can point to. Just a fog of doubt and rumor that settles over a person until the town sees them through it. Because, Cole thought, the most insidious kind of cruelty. Because it didn't leave marks. Just customers who didn't come back. Just neighbors who believed they had reasonable concerns. Hailey came to the office doorway. I need to make calls this afternoon, she said. Personal calls. To people who might have accounts of what they saw or experienced with Pruitt's properties. Use my office, Cole said. Looked at him. You sure? You need quiet and a door that closes, he said. She nodded and went to get her phone. Walked out to the main bay and stood for a moment looking at Ray's shovel head, which sat clean and perfect in its spot. And he thought about what it meant that a 24-year-old woman had walked in here with a toolbox and in 2 weeks had become the boot or trying the kind of person this garage had apparently needed without knowing it. About his own chapter. Men who had spent years being looked at sideways by a town that had decided what they were before ever having a conversation with them. About Hailey, who had spent months being slowly erased by a man who understood that you don't have to destroy someone directly if you can make everyone around them believe there's nothing worth keeping. Ray appeared beside him, coffee in hand, having apparently materialized from the back bay on his own schedule, as he always did. Cole said. I heard, Ray said. Pete confirmed the Pruitt connection. He remembered what happened to Bill Delaney. Ray nodded slowly. Bill Delaney sold that property for 60% of what it was worth because he had nothing left to sell it for. He paused. Bought parts from Bill for 15 years. He was solid. I never understood what happened to him. Now you do, Cole said. Ray drank his coffee. Tuesday, Ray said. Tuesday, Cole said. Be there, Ray said. At the county attorney's office. Cole looked at him. Inside, Ray clarified. I'm not going to crowd her in there. I'm going to be there, outside. So she knows someone showed up. Cole nodded. I'll be there too, he said. The calls Hailey made that afternoon produced 4 things she hadn't had before. The first was a recorded statement from a woman named Donna Birch, who had been a customer of Morgan's Auto since Thomas Morgan opened the shop in 9,987, and who had stopped coming in 8 months ago because a friend had told her she was now unable to say exactly who, which was itself telling that the shop had declined since Thomas got sick. I had heard it, believed it, and never verified it. She was on the phone with Hailey, ashamed of herself in a way that came through clearly, even through a cell connection. She agreed to put her statement in writing. The second was a name. A former employee of Pruitt's development company who had quit 14 months ago and who, according to the person who gave Hailey the name, had been troubled enough by what he'd seen internally that he'd consulted an employment attorney before leaving. His name was Greg Salas. Hailey wrote it down twice. The third was a piece of information from an old family friend who still attended the same church as two members of the town council. Also had received a formal letter from Pruitt's attorney 6 weeks ago, the friend said, regarding the Morgan property. A letter that suggested the property was being mismanaged and that the town might wish to consider certain zoning review processes. The friend didn't have a copy, but she remembered the conversation clearly enough to describe its content. She wrote down every word. The fourth thing was the call she almost didn't make. She sat with her phone in Cole's office for almost 5 minutes before she dialed. Contact in her phone was listed simply as Dad's attorney, Gerald Finn. Gerald Finn was 70 years old and had been Thomas Morgan's attorney for 25 years, not a big firm, not a fancy office, just a man who had done careful, honest legal work for the working people of Millhaven for decades and who had the particular quality of someone who had outlasted several people who'd underestimated him. Up on the second ring. Hailey, he said. His voice was the warmth of someone who had known her since she was small. I was wondering when you'd call. She stopped. You were expecting to hear from me? I've been hearing things, Gerald said. About the property, about Pruitt. I've been hearing things for about 4 months, and I've been waiting for you to be ready. A pause. Arito. Are you ready? Hailey exhaled a long, slow exhale that carried something with it. I have 26 pieces of documentation, she said. Paragraphs, more footage, accounts, written. I have a meeting at the county attorney's office tomorrow. Silence on Gerald's end. 26 pieces. Yes. How long have you been collecting this? Since the second time he approached me. 5 months. Another pause. Hailey, Gerald said, and his voice had changed. It had the particular quality of someone who has been concerned about a situation for a long time and has just received information that shifts it significantly. I'm going to be in that meeting tomorrow. Gerald, I have standing as your family's attorney of record, he said. I have documentation of the 2 formal approaches Pruitt made to your father. I was present for the second one, and I took notes. I have. He stopped. What? Hailey said. A pause that lasted long enough to change the air in the room. I received a letter, Gerald said slowly. About 3 months ago, Pruitt's attorney. It was framed as a courtesy, professional courtesy between attorneys. It suggested that given Thomas's health situation, it might be in the family's best interest to consider the property sale, and that they hoped to avoid any complications that a prolonged dispute might create. He paused. Their complications was not defined. Hailey was very still. That letter, she said. I have that letter, Gerald said. I was waiting to know what you wanted to do with it. The evidence folder on her phone had 26 entries. She had just found 27. She came out of the office at 4 in the afternoon, looking like someone who had been through a weather system not destroyed. Changed by it and whatever carrying the storm had left in her expression and her posture, and the particular set of her jaw. Cole was at the workbench. He looked up. Gerald Finn is coming to the meeting tomorrow, Hailey said. Cole set down what he was holding. He has a letter, she said. Pruitt's attorney, 3 months ago, framed as a professional courtesy but worded in a way that she stopped. It's a threat, Cole. Dressed in legal language, but it's a threat. And it came from Pruitt's attorney, which means it came from Pruitt, means there's a paper trail that connects him directly to the pressure campaign. Cole said nothing, watching her. 27 pieces, she said. I had 26. Good, Cole said. It's good, she said. Very good. It's also. She stopped again. She put her hand on the workbench for a moment, not leaning, just touching it. A brief contact with something solid. He went after my father, not just me. He went after my father through his attorney while my father was in the hospital. Cole was quiet. He doesn't know, Hailey said. He doesn't know any of this. Hospital bed dealing with enough. And I haven't told him because I didn't want to, because he'd worry. Doctors said stress. She pressed her mouth together. I've been doing this so he wouldn't have to know. Oh, he could just focus on getting better without knowing that someone was trying to take everything he spent his life building. She stopped. She pulled her hand off the workbench. She straightened. Okay, she said. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Gerald's meeting me there. Ray and I will be outside, Cole said. At him, not inside, he said, before she could speak. Outside. You need your space in there and we're not going to crowd it. We'll be there. She held his gaze. The evaluating look was still there. It was always there. A permanent, slightly raised calibration of someone who had learned not to take things at face value. Something had shifted. Just slightly. A lock shifts when the right key turns. Okay, she said. There she picked up her tool bag. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and she said, turning around, you know what the worst part of this whole thing is? The worst part isn't Pruitt. The worst part is that it worked. Yes, it worked. People stopped coming in. People believed the story about me, and I had no way to fight it because you can't fight a rumor. You can only outlast it or replace it with something true. Cole said, you replaced it. She turned. By walking in here, he said, by fixing Ray's bike, by coming back and fixing Pete's and Garrett's, by being exactly who you are in a room full of people who had no reason to give you the benefit of the doubt until you gave them a reason to. He paused. The story about you is different now, in this garage, and in everyone who talks to this garage. Pruitt's story is losing ground. Hailey looked at him for a moment. A garage, she said, in one corner of one town. Stories spread, Cole said, especially true ones. She held his gaze one more second. She walked out. The door closed behind her. Hatch Aradas, who had been doing something quiet in the back for the last hour, Lemon stood beside Cole. She's going to be okay, Hatch said. A question, not reassurance. A statement of assessment from a man who had been watching and making calculations. Oh, he's going to be okay, Cole said. The question was whether she had to do it completely alone. Hatch nodded. Nobody should have to do it completely alone. Cole looked at the door she'd gone through. Oh, he said they shouldn't. That night, Garfield Pruitt received information. He received it the way he received most useful information through a third party who had a third party's deniability, passed along in a phone call that lasted less than 4 minutes, and that Pruitt would later claim. If anyone ever asked, he didn't specifically remember. Information was this. The Morgan girl had spent the afternoon in the Hells Angels garage making phone calls. She had spoken to Gerald Finn. She had a meeting at the county attorney's office the next morning. Pruitt listened. He was 61 years old, and he had been navigating situations like this one for 20 years. The first response to this kind of information was never panic, but was for people who hadn't planned their contingencies. Contingencies. He called his attorney at 8:47 p. It lasted 11 minutes. His attorney, a man named Howard Leff, who had practiced in the county for 15 years and understood implicitly which clients required which kind of help, listened carefully. He asked 2 questions. He said he understood. The next morning, at 8:15, 45 minutes before Hailey's meeting at the county attorney's office, call was placed to a person in that office, not to the county attorney herself, to an administrator. All raised questions about the appropriateness of the meeting, given what was characterized as an ongoing civil dispute in which the county might be seen as taking sides. All was carefully worded, professionally worded. Whoever made it had clearly done their homework on who in that office was most likely to be cautious about appearances. At 45, the meeting was in jeopardy. Hailey got the call at 8:47 while she was in her truck in the parking lot of a coffee shop 2 miles from the county building. There were onstaters. The administrator said there were concerns about the scope of the meeting. Given the nature of the matter, there was some question about whether this was the appropriate venue for the administrator used the phrase allegations of this type. Hailey said, what type? The administrator said, allegations involving a prominent local businessman. Hailey said nothing for 3 seconds. Then she said, I have an appointment confirmed with your office. I have documentation of crimes. I have an attorney accompanying me. Are you telling me the meeting is canceled? The administrator hedged. Not canceled. necessarily. Said perhaps a brief postponement while the appropriate parties. I'll be there at 9, Hailey said. She hung up. She sat in her truck. Her hands were on the steering wheel, and her knuckles were white, and she was breathing the way you breathe when you have been hit and you need 3 seconds to assess the damage before you decide how to respond. Called Gerald Finn. Gerald picked up immediately. He said. The call went to Patricia Marsh. She's an administrator. She's not the attorney. She doesn't have authority to postpone a scheduled meeting without the county attorney's approval. But we show up, we keep the appointment. If they try to turn us away at the door, that becomes part of the record. He knew about the meeting, Hailey said, out somehow, and he moved overnight to block it. Yes, Gerald said, which means we're closer to the truth than he's comfortable with. Gerald paused. Hailey, I've practiced law in this county for 40 years. That's happened. A call at 8 in the morning to an administrator derail a 9 o'clock meeting. That is the behavior of someone who is frightened. Garfield Pruitt is frightened. I want you to hold on to that. Hailey pressed her mouth together. 9 o'clock, she said. I'll be there in 10 minutes, Gerald said. Car's already running. Cole got the call at 8:51. He was in his truck 2 blocks from the county building he and Ray had left early. Both of them independently deciding that earlier was better. He listened to Hailey's voice, which was controlled, but carrying something compressed in it. Explain what had happened. When she finished, he said, Are you still going? Yes, she said. Then we're still there, he said. Like I said. A pause. Cole, she said. He knew about the meeting. He moved that fast. I know, Cole said. Which means someone in town is telling him things. Watching my movements, my calls, She stopped. Blue truck, she said. It hasn't been on Route 9. That doesn't mean they stopped watching. No, Cole said. He looked at Ray in the passenger seat. Ray was listening, face forward, reading the situation from Cole's half of the conversation. You walk in there, Hailey. You walk in with Gerald, and you put everything you have on that table. Whatever they try to do with the meeting, you make sure every piece of documentation is in front of the county attorney, not the administrator. The attorney, her name is Susan Pratt. She has a reputation for being direct. How do you know her name? Hailey said. I spent last night making sure I knew everything about that building that I should know, Cole said. Their pause. Thank you, Hailey said. Drive, Cole said. There. He hung up. Ray said Pruitt moved last night. Fast, Cole said. He's scared, Ray said. Good, Cole said. He put the truck in drive. Scared people make mistakes. Gerald Finn was waiting on the steps of the county building when Hailey arrived. He was 70 years old, and he was wearing a suit that was probably 30 years old and completely pressed. And he had a leather briefcase that looked like it had been through wars and won them all. And when Hailey walked up the steps toward him, he looked at her with the particular expression of someone who has decided, after 70 years of life, exactly what hills are worth dying on. Tired, he said. I am tired, she said. He said. Tired people don't waste energy on things that don't matter. Come on. They went in together. Patricia Marsh was at the front desk, and she looked at them with the expression of someone who had been hoping they wouldn't actually show up and was now recalibrating. Harold walked to the desk and said, pleasantly, Third Finn, me of record for the Morgan family. We have a 9 o'clock appointment with County Attorney Pratt. We're here for that appointment, Patricia said. Mr. Finn, as I mentioned in the call to my client, Gerald said, Yes. I understand there were concerns raised this morning about the scope of the meeting. He opened his briefcase on the counter deliberately, unhurriedly, and he took out 2 sheets of paper and placed them in front of Patricia. This is the original appointment confirmation, signed by County Attorney Pratt's office. And this is a letter from me dated this morning, formally noting that any attempt to postpone or cancel this meeting would itself become material in an ongoing legal matter involving obstruction. He smiled pleasantly. Patricia stared at the papers. She picked up her phone. She made a call. Hailey stood beside Gerald and looked at the building's ceiling and breathed slowly. In and out, the way she breathed when she was working on something that required patience. Patricia put the phone down. She'll see you, she said. Susan Pratt was 44, direct in the way of someone who had spent 2 decades in county government and had stopped having patience for maneuvering before she was 40. She had short hair and reading glasses on a chain and a desk covered in organized stacks of paper and the expression of someone who had already, they walked in the door, made some kind of preliminary assessment. She stood up when they came in. She shook Gerald's hand and then Hailey's hand. She looked at Hailey at her face, her posture, the tool bag she'd brought purely out of habit, and then decided not to leave in the truck because it was hers, and she was bringing everything that was hers today. Susan Pratt said, "I received a call this morning from an attorney I know representing Garfield Pruitt. All suggested this meeting was inappropriate. I want you to know I took note of the timing of that call." She looked at Hailey steadily. "I also want you to know that a call at 8 in the morning trying to prevent a meeting scheduled for 9 tends to make me more interested in the meeting. Less. Sit down, both of you. Tell me everything." Gerald opened his briefcase, took out her phone. She opened the evidence folder. 27 pieces. She looked at Susan Pratt across the desk. Then she began. She spoke for 42 minutes. She didn't rush. She didn't ramble. She went through everything in order: the timeline, the approaches, escalation, the recordings, photographs, camera footage of the two men in the lot, the letter to Gerald, communication, the names of customers who would provide statements from Greg Salas and what he knew. She laid it out the way she laid out a mechanical diagnosis, not impressionistically, was emotional, but in the precise sequential logic of someone who understands that truth lands harder when it lands in order. Errol supplemented. He provided the letter from Pruitt's attorney. He provided his own notes from the second approach meeting. Provided the professional context that transformed Hailey's account from a personal dispute into a documented pattern. Pratt did not interrupt. She took notes throughout, on a legal pad on a laptop, typing steadily, which meant she was creating a record in real time. This finished. Susan looked at her notes for a moment. Then she looked up. "Miss Morgan," she said, "I want to be careful about what I tell you at this stage, because an investigation is a process, and I don't make promises before I've completed one. I want to be direct with you." She paused. "What you've presented this morning is not a civil dispute. What you've presented, if it holds up to verification, and I have no reason at this stage to believe it won't, is a criminal extortion case, potentially a racketeering case, depending on what Mr. Laws has to say about the internal operations of Pruitt's organization." Hailey felt something move through her, not relief, yet something more like the particular sensation of a thing that has been tipping for a long time, finally deciding which way it's going to fall. "It happens now," she said. "I open an investigation," Susan said, "formally today, which means what happened this morning, the call to my administrator, becomes part of my record of this case. It also means that from this point forward, any action taken against you or your property is subject to obstruction and witness intimidation statutes." She looked at Hailey, which means the pressure stops. Not because Pruitt is necessarily a good person, he isn't, based on what I'm looking at, but because the cost of continuing it just went up significantly. Gerald said, "The property, the mortgage arrears? I can't directly intervene in a financial matter," Susan said. "I can tell you that a formal criminal investigation into Pruitt will become public record within 72 hours. Public record has a way of changing conversations, including conversations between lenders and borrowers who suddenly have context they didn't have before." She looked at Hailey again. "Exceptional work here," she said. "This documentation is thorough. You anticipated what would be needed and you collected it systematically over 5 months. Not easy. That takes discipline, and it takes courage, and it takes the particular kind of clarity that most people don't have when they're in the middle of something this frightening." Hailey looked at the desk. She looked at the evidence folder on her phone, 27 entries, 5 months of her life, 5 months of holding this thing together alone, and she held very still. "I had help," she said, "at the end. I didn't have it at the beginning. I had it at the end." "The people outside," Susan said. They looked up. Susan allowed herself a small, contained smile. To the parking lot from my window, Miss Morgan. I noticed two men in a truck who have been sitting out there since before you arrived. She paused. Inside, they didn't try to come in. They're just there. Hailey thought about Ray, who had said he wanted to be there, so she knew someone showed up. About Cole, who had said stories spread. The true ones, yeah, she said. They're just there. Susan Pratt nodded, closed her laptop. I'll be in touch within 24 hours, she said. Keep your documentation secured. Keep your phone charged. Miss Morgan, she paused. Go home and get some sleep. She came out of the building into the October cold, and Gerald was beside her, and she stood on the top step for a moment, and the air was sharp in her lungs, and the sky was the gray of every month she'd spent under it, and she breathed. His truck was across the parking lot. He was leaning against the driver's side door, with his arms crossed and his collar up against the wind. Ray was beside him, coffee cup in hand, because Ray was always going to have a coffee cup in hand. They were just there. Hailey walked across the parking lot, up to in front of them. Cole looked at her face and read it the way he read everything completely. Oh, hurry. She opened an investigation, Hailey said. Cole nodded once. She said the pressure should stop. Instead of continuing, it went up. Ray said nothing. He drank his coffee. She called it a criminal extortion case, Hailey said, essentially racketeering. A beat of silence. Then Ray said, really quietly, good. Cole was still watching Hailey's face, because behind the controlled delivery of the facts, behind the precise, sequential reporting of what had happened in that office, he could see what the facts were resting on. 5 months of fear she hadn't shown anyone. The calls to doctors about her father, it's in the family garage with the work light on, and the locks checked twice. Evidence folder built entry by entry like a wall she was building against something she was determined not to let through. Hey, he said. Hailey looked at him. She had been asked that question in various forms for months. She had answered it the same way every time, with a version of fine that left no room for follow-up and was designed, precisely, to leave no room for follow-up. She looked at Cole Harrison in the parking lot of the county building in the October cold, Ray beside him and Gerald at her back, and 27 pieces of documentation on her phone. She said the first completely honest answer she'd given anyone in a very long time. Yet, she said, but I think I'm going to be. Cole nodded. Ray finished his coffee. Come on, Ray said. I know a place on Route 7 that does breakfast until 2. You look like you haven't eaten since yesterday. Hailey almost smiled. Haven't eaten since yesterday, she said. Then let's go, Ray said, as if this settled everything. And for that moment, just that moment, it did. The investigation went public on a Thursday, not with fanfare, not with a press conference or a breaking news banner, like the way most real things go public in a small town quietly, through official channels, a formal notice filed with the county clerk that was publicly accessible to anyone who thought to look. But in Millhaven, someone always looked. And once one person looked, information moved the way. Information moves in a place where everyone knows everyone, and the distance between a courthouse filing and a breakfast conversation at Vera's diner is approximately 45 minutes. On Friday morning, Garfield Pruitt's name was in every conversation in town, as a benefactor, not as a developer, as a subject of a criminal investigation. They heard about it from Gerald Finn, who called it 7-2A, and said simply, it's filed. It's public. Brace yourself for the next few days. This is when it gets loud before it gets quiet. She was at Morgan's garage when he called. She'd been there since 6, working on a transmission job that had come in 2 days ago from a man named Carl Britton, who had driven past us the shop for 8 months without stopping, and had finally pulled in with the slightly sheepish energy of someone who owed a debt they hadn't paid yet. It made him explain. She'd just looked at the truck and given him a fair estimate and scheduled the work. That was what the last 2 weeks had been. Slow at first, one car, then a call from someone who said a friend had mentioned her name. The rumor that Pruitt had seeded about her work had not disappeared overnight. It had started losing its grip the way Lies lose their grip when the truth becomes visible enough and close enough for people to compare. Pete had talked. Donna Birch had talked. Marcus Doyle had been talking for years, and now people were listening differently. And the Hells Angels garage on Route 9 had become, without anyone formally deciding it, a place where her name meant something solid. She put the phone down after Gerald's call, and she stood in her father's garage, and she thought about the weight she'd been carrying and how it felt now, not gone yet, but different, like something that had been pressing down from above had shifted to beside her, which was still heavy, but was a different kind of heavy. And you could walk with, the kind you could work with. Oh, she picked up a wrench. She went back to Carl's transmission. This crack in Pruitt's public position came from an unexpected direction. Alex Salas, the former Pruitt employee, whose name Hailey had gotten from a contact 2 weeks ago, had apparently been waiting for exactly this moment. Third, he had, it turned out, not just consulted an employment attorney before leaving Pruitt's organization. Documented things. 14 months of things. Letter, emails, internal memos, records of conversations he had witnessed and written down in a personal journal he kept on a laptop that had never connected to any Pruitt company server. His attorney contacted Susan Pratt's office on Friday afternoon. Called Hailey with the news at 4:30. Laws has records going back 3 years, Gerald said. At least 2 other properties where the same playbook was used. He has an email sent from Pruitt's personal account, his business account, which tells you exactly how careful he was being, that references the Morgan property specifically. It says, and I'm reading directly, the Morgan situation needs to be resolved before the end of Q4 or the corridor timeline falls apart. Hailey stood very still. The Morgan situation, she said. That's what he called it, Gerald said. The negotiation, not the acquisition, the situation. A pause. When a man with resources and connections refers to a family's property as a situation to be resolved on a quarterly timeline, and then 2 men show up at that property at 10:30 at night, the connection is not hard to draw. Has Pruitt said anything? Hailey said. His attorney released a statement this afternoon, Gerald said. It says his client categorically denies any wrongdoing and that the allegations are without merit and motivated by a personal dispute. A personal dispute, Hailey said. She was quiet for a moment. Gerald, she said. What do I do with that? Nothing, Gerald said. What you do? Nothing. You let the investigation proceed. Make statements. You don't respond publicly. Give interviews. You go to work and you let Susan Pratt do what Susan Pratt is very good at doing. He paused. You've already done your part. You did it 5 months ago when you started that evidence folder. Now is to not get in the way of the truth you already told. She took that in. Okay, she said. How's the shop, he said. She looked at Carl's truck. She looked at the 2 other jobs waiting in the bay. She looked at the scheduling calendar on the wall where Thomas Morgan had written appointments in his careful handwriting for 35 years, and where her handwriting now appeared below his, filling in dates that had been empty for too long. Coming back, she said. Gerald made a sound that was not quite a word, the sound of someone releasing something they'd been holding. He said. That's good, Hailey. The courtroom came 3 months later. Not Millhaven's small municipal building, the county courthouse, with the high ceilings and the wood paneling that smelled like decades of serious decisions. Bill Pruitt sat at the defense table in a suit that cost more than most people in that room made in a month. The attorney sat beside him with the careful composure of someone running a defense that had gotten significantly more difficult since Greg Salas walked into Susan Pratt's office with 14 months of documentation. Hailey sat in the gallery. She had been told she might be called to testify. Prepared for it the way she prepared for everything thoroughly, without drama. She had reviewed every piece of documentation. She had spoken with Gerald 3 times in the week before. She had slept 8 hours the night before, which she had been doing only occasionally in the months leading up to this, and which felt like something she had earned. Cole was 2 seats to her left. Ray was beside Cole. Marcus Doyle was in the row behind them. He had shown up without being asked, which was exactly the kind of thing Marcus did. Donna Birch was there. Uh, Pete was there. 3 other people who had given statements were there, spread through the gallery, present in the way that matters, not loudly, performatively, just there, visible, counted. Hailey was called in the afternoon session. There, she walked to the stand the way she walked into every room without announcement, or performance, taking up exactly the space she required and no more. She was sworn in. The prosecutor asked her to describe the first time Garfield Pruitt approached her about the Morgan property. She described it. She answered every question with the same quality she brought to everything: precise, sequential, factual, and entirely free of the performance of victimhood that Pruitt's attorney was clearly hoping to use against her. She was not trembling. She was not angry. She was not asking anyone to feel sorry for her. She was just telling the truth. Pruitt's attorney cross-examined her for 40 minutes. He tried 6 different angles. He suggested her documentation was selective. She explained calmly how she had documented everything in real time, timestamps, specifically to prevent that argument. He suggested her account of the night in the parking lot was exaggerated. She said she had camera footage and a recording. He suggested the contact between the 2 men and herself had been mutual. She said she had medical records of the injuries to her hand and her face from a visit to a clinic the following morning, a visit she had made and documented specifically because she had understood that documentation was the only reliable protection against being told later that nothing had happened. The attorney paused. He looked at his notes. He had run out of angles. No further questions. Hailey stepped down, walked back to her seat. Cole did not say anything. Ray did not say anything. Nobody needed to. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon in January, bold and clear, and it came in the form of guilty findings on 2 counts of criminal extortion and 1 count of witness intimidation. The county attorney's administrator the morning of Hailey's meeting had, as Gerald had predicted, become part of the record. This attorney was already talking about appeals, which was his right. But the property dispute had been separately resolved. The civil finding against Pruitt included a judgment that the pressure campaign had materially damaged the Morgan property's value and business revenue, and the damages awarded were specific and substantial. They're specific enough to cover the mortgage arrears, with enough left over to matter. I heard the verdict in the courtroom, and she sat very still for a moment. Then she pulled out her phone. She opened the evidence folder. She looked at the 27 entries, 5 months of her life, 5 months of being alone in the family garage with the work light on and the locks checked twice and the weight of it pressing down. She deleted the folder, not because she was erasing it. The documentation was in Gerald's file, in Susan Pratt's office, in the formal record of the case. It was permanent. It was real. It was there. She deleted it because she didn't need to carry it anymore. I watched her do it. He didn't know what he was watching exactly, just that she looked at something deliberate, and then put it in her pocket. Something in her shoulders changed when she put it away. Some fraction of weight that had been there so long, it had started to look like posture. Looked at Ray. Ray looked back. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. Outside the town of Millhaven went on being a small town, the same streets, the same diners, the same conversations at Vera's counter. But something had shifted in the way that towns shift when a story they thought they knew turns out to have been a different story all along. The name Morgan had been surrounded by doubt for 8 months, but the doubt had a different address. Marcus Doyle, walking out of the courthouse behind the group, said to nobody in particular, a 4-year-old woman with a tool bag walked into a biker garage and brought down a man who owned half the south side of town. I'd like to see someone argue with that. Nobody argued with it. He was already on the steps, Gerald beside her. Cold air moving around her, the way it moved around, someone who has just put down something very heavy and is noticing, the first time in a long time, how it feels to stand straight. Cole came out behind her and stood at the top of the steps. There, he said. Have you told him? She had visited Thomas Morgan the evening before. She had sat beside his hospital bed and she had told him everything, all of it. From Pruitt's first approach to the evidence folder to Susan Pratt's face when she opened the investigation to today. Told him because he deserved to know, and because she was done carrying it alone, because he was her father, and he had built the thing she had just fought to save, and he had a right to know it was saved. Miss Morgan had listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he had looked at her for a long moment. He had said, "You documented everything." "Yes," she said. "In the beginning," he said. "Yes." He had closed his eyes for a moment. Think them. When he opened them, they were bright. "I taught you that," he said. "Give me everything," she said. He had reached out and taken her right hand, with the faded marks on the knuckles that were almost invisible now, and he had held it and said anything else. He didn't need to. Now Hailey looked at Cole on the courthouse steps and said, "Cried?" He tried not to, but he cried. She paused. "The garage smells like it always did." Cole looked at her. "Does," she said. "I've been keeping it exactly the way he left it. I didn't move anything, didn't change anything. I just kept it running." She stopped. "I was trying to do. Just keep it running until he could come back to it." Cole said, "All right, he'll come back to it." Hailey looked at the courthouse steps. January sky. At the town laid out below them, ordinary and complicated and not quite the same as it had been this morning. She said, "He will." She walked down the steps. Ray fell in beside her without ceremony, which was Ray's way appearing at the right moment without making it about the appearance. Cole came behind them. Marcus joined from the other side. Group moved through the parking lot the way people move when they have been through something together and have arrived on the other side of it and are still figuring out what that means. Her truck, Hailey stopped. She turned and looked at the three of them. Cole, Ray, Marcus, and she seemed for a moment to be working out what to say, which was unusual for her because she was not generally a person who struggled to find words. She was a person who chose them carefully and then used exactly the ones she meant. "I walked into your garage," she said to Cole, "because I needed a place to be worth something. In a moment when someone was working very hard to make me worth nothing." She paused. "But you gave me that, all of you." She looked at Ray. "That first night with the shovel head, I needed that more than the money, more than the work. I needed to be in a room and be right about something when everything else was telling me I was wrong." Ray looked at her steadily. "Right about the bike," he said. "You were right about everything." She nodded. In her truck, she drove back to Morgan's auto and cycle repair. All Britain's transmission was finished and 2 new jobs were scheduled for Monday. And where a painted sign above the bay read Morgan's Auto and Cycle Repair, there Est 987 in letters that were starting to peel at the corners, and that she had been meaning to repaint for months. Out of the truck, she stood in front of the sign. She went inside and found the paint. She came back out. The sign dried overnight. Hailey had repainted it in the last 2 hours of daylight on the day of the verdict, from a stepladder with a brush she'd found in her father's supply cabinet, the same brush she was fairly certain that Thomas Morgan had used to paint the sign the first time 85 years ago. The bristles were stiff but workable. The paint was the same color. She'd matched it carefully, holding the can up to the existing letters until she was certain. When she came down from the ladder and stood back, the sign read exactly the way it had always read. Same letters, same style, same faded dignity of a thing that had survived longer than anyone who wanted it gone. She stood there in the cold for a moment, looking at it. Then she went inside, washed the brush, and went to bed. She slept 9 hours without interruption, which was the first time she had done that in almost 6 months. February came, and the shop was busy. Overwhelmingly not yet, but steadily. The kind of steady that builds on itself. Their job leading to a customer mentioning her name to a neighbor pulling in on a Tuesday with something that needed looking at. Paul Britton had come back with his wife's car. Pete had sent 3 people from his building crew. A woman Hailey didn't know had driven 40 minutes from a town on the other side of the county because she'd read something online about what had happened in Millhaven and wanted her motorcycle looked at by someone she'd decided she could trust. That last one stopped Hailey for a moment. Someone she'd decided she could trust. On a story based on truth that had become visible enough that it traveled. about what Cole had said. Stories spread, especially true ones. She called Cole that evening, not for any particular reason. She had started doing that occasionally. The way you start calling someone when they've crossed the line from useful to necessary in the particular category of people you trust. Came in today from Harker County, she said. Drove 40 minutes, said. She'd read about the case. Cole said, what did you do with her motorcycle? Fixed it, Hailey said. She had a fuel delivery issue, she'd been told, was the carburetor. Carburetor? Of course it wasn't, Cole said. Cole smiled. Word is spreading, she said. I don't know how to feel about that exactly. Feel good about it, Cole said. Heard it. It feels strange, she said. It feels like people are coming because of the story about what happened, not because of the work. The work is the reason anyone's still talking about the story, Cole said. Into this garage and fixed a motorcycle nobody else could fix. Hi, Marcus sent you here. That's why Ray told people. Harry wouldn't have traveled if you weren't actually that good. A pause. Allowed to let the two things coexist, Hailey. Allowed to be someone people respect for both. She sat with that. How's Ray, she said. Riding the shovelhead every day the weather allows, Cole said. He says it runs better than it did when his father owned it. She did smile at that. Oh, I'll be in Thursday, she said. I know, Cole said. Garrett's bike needs the 3,000-mile check, and he specifically requested you. Garrett's never met me, she said. He's met his transmission, Cole said. That's enough. Thomas Morgan came home in March. Not fully recovered, the doctor used the phrase managed condition and was careful about timelines, but home. Sitting in his own kitchen, drinking coffee from his own cup, looking out at the garage through the window, the way he had looked out at it for 35 years, a particular expression of a man who has organized a large portion of his identity around a and is profoundly relieved to still be adjacent to it. He was there when they brought him home. She had cleaned the house the day before, not because it was dirty, but because she needed to do something with her hands while she waited. And cleaning was something her hands knew how to do. She had put coffee on 20 minutes before they arrived. She had put his reading glasses on the table beside his chair. Thomas walked in and saw the glasses where they always were. He stopped. He stood very still for a moment. Then he sat down in his chair and he looked at his daughter and he said, Fine. I repainted it, she said. Same color, same brush. He looked at his hands. Come here, he said. She sat in the chair beside him, the one that had always been hers, and she'd sat in since she was a child, doing homework, while he read, and he reached over and put his hand on her arm, and he said nothing for a while. And she said nothing either, because some things don't need language to be fully communicated. For a while, he said, Tell me about the garage. Everything since October, she told him. The legal parts, Gerald had handled that, had briefed Thomas thoroughly, had made sure he understood every detail of the case and the outcome while he was still in the hospital. Their parts. The shovelhead, Pete's Sportster, Garrett's transmission, the woman from Harker County, under filling up. The morning she'd stood in front of the repainted sign and felt something shift that she still didn't have the exact right word for. Just listened the way he had always listened, completely, interruption, with the particular quality of attention he'd given to engines and to people equally his whole life. When she finished, he said, Cole Harrison. Yes, she said. Thomas said. I know. He showed up to the courthouse, Thomas said. Harold told me. He was outside, Hailey said. He didn't come in. She said you needed your space in there. Thomas nodded slowly. Figure says. That's a man who understands something about dignity, he said. As Hailey said. He does. Thomas looked out toward the garage. But to meet him, he said. Hailey looked at her father, thinner than before, moving more carefully than before, but with the same eyes, the same quality of attention, the same absolute bedrock solidness that she had organized her courage around her whole life without fully realizing it until it was nearly taken from her. I'll arrange it, she said. The meeting happened on a Saturday in late March. Morgan's garage at 10 in the morning because Thomas Morgan had said he wanted it to be at the garage and he wanted to be standing when they came in. He was standing. He was holding a coffee cup and wearing the flannel shirt with the tear at the left shoulder that Hailey had mended twice and that he refused to stop wearing. Well, and he looked like himself, not like someone just home from a hospital. Not like someone who had been through a frightening winter. Like Thomas Morgan, mechanic father, the man whose name was on the sign. Cole came alone. He pulled in, got out of his truck, walked to the bay entrance, and stopped at the frame the way you stop when you want to signal respect for a space before entering it. Thomas looked at him. Cole looked at Thomas. Thomas said, "Harrison." "Yes, sir," Cole said. Thomas said, "Better fixed your members' motorcycles." "She did," Cole said. "Better than anyone had in months. In some cases, better than anyone ever had." Thomas said, "You showed up to the courthouse." "Outside," Cole said. "She didn't need us inside." Thomas was quiet for a moment. There. He looked at Cole with the thorough, unhurried assessment of a man who has spent a lifetime reading people through their work and their choices and is now reading this one. Then he said, "Thank you." Not elaborately, not with the kind of formality that makes a moment self-conscious. Just thank you. The way a man says it when he means it completely and doesn't need to dress it up. Cole said, "She did the hard part. She did most of it before she ever walked through our door." "I know," Thomas said. "She's been doing the hard part her whole life." He looked at Hailey, who was standing to the side with her coffee, and the expression she got when she was trying not to feel something too visibly. "There, I just didn't always know how hard." Hailey looked at her coffee cup. "Third," she said. "I'm allowed to say it," Thomas said. "I've been in a hospital bed, thinking it for 5 months." Cole looked at the garage, the tools on the walls in their places, under the workbench that had the particular organized quality of a space used by 2 generations of careful people. "It is a good shop," Cole said. "It is," Thomas said. Hailey, put more coffee on, let's talk." The blue truck was never seen in Millhaven again. Fairfield Pruitt's appeal was denied 4 months after the verdict. Development Corridor, the project for which the Morgan property had been designated a necessary acquisition, collapsed without the financing that had been contingent on that acquisition, without the professional reputation that had been contingent on everything else. 2 of the town council members who had received his letter about the Morgan property declined to seek re-election. The new wing of the public library kept his name on it, as removing it would have required a process nobody had the energy to initiate, but nobody referred to it by that name anymore. The town moved on, always do, but they move on differently when the story they carry forward has been corrected. On a Tuesday in April, something happened at the Hells Angels garage that Cole would remember for a long time. A young woman came in. She was 22 years old, had her own tools. She was looking for work, not asking for charity, explaining herself at length, just standing in the entrance with a canvas bag and a direct expression, and saying she'd heard this was a place that judged people by what they could do. Danny Reyes was the one who saw her first. He almost said something dismissive, not one word and look, before Cole appeared from the office and held up 2 fingers, and Danny stopped. Cole looked at the young woman, looked at her tools. He looked at her face, the particular expression of someone who is tired of being underestimated and has decided to stop waiting for permission to be worth something. Something he recognized. "What can you do?" he said. "Show me what's broken." Cole almost smiled. Aside the same gesture he'd made 6 months ago for a different young woman with the same quality of determination, and he created a clear path to the back bay. Called Hailey that evening. "We had someone come in today," he said. Young, her own tools. "Wanted a chance." Hailey said. "What did you do?" Gave her one, Cole said. A pause. Hailey said. "She reminded me of someone," Cole said. It was quiet for a moment. "Is she good?" she said. "She fixed something in 40 minutes that Danny had been staring at for 2 days," Cole said. Hailey said, "Then she's good." "I thought you might want to know she exists," Cole said, "in case you have work at your shop." Another pause, longer this time, but with something in it that was not quite surprise and not quite inevitability, somewhere between the two. "Send her over Thursday," Hailey said. "I have more work than I have hands right now." "I'll tell her," Cole said. "Oh," she said. "Yeah." The first night, she said, "Walked in. What did you actually think?" When you saw me, he considered that. About it before, had turned it over occasionally, the way you turn over a memory that contains something instructive. That he actually thought that first second before the professional assessment and the reading of the room and the decision to step aside and give her access to the bike, you looked like someone who had been carrying something alone for too long, he said. Whatever she came here for, she earned the right to try for it just by walking through that door. The line was quiet for a moment. "Er," she said. That was enough, he said. I was right, she said. You were. She hung up. She stood in Morgan's garage, her father's garage, the garage whose signs she had repainted with the same brush her father had used 35 years ago, and she looked at the calendar on the wall where appointments filled the week in her handwriting, customers' names, her work, her life rebuilt from the wreckage of someone else's attempt to take it. About the evidence folder. 27 entries. 5 months of her life. She thought about the shovelhead running clean for the first time in months, and Ray's voice saying there she is like a man greeting something he'd been afraid to lose. About her father in his chair, reading glasses on the table where she'd put them, eat coffee in his cup, looking out at this place like it was the most important thing in his world. About a 22-year-old woman with her own tools standing in a garage doorway, asking to be judged by what she could do. About all the people who had decided she was small before they knew her. All the ones who had decided differently after. She understood with the quiet certainty of someone who has been tested completely and has not been found wanting, of Millhaven had not given her anything she hadn't already earned. It had only finally gotten out of the way long enough to see what had always been there. Above her wrench, she went back to work. Because that was who Hailey Morgan was, not the girl who survived a hard year, the woman the bikers believed in, not the case that changed the town's idea of itself. She was the mechanic. She was the one who showed up. She was the one who brought her own tools, fixed what others couldn't, documented what others ignored, stood where others sat down, and when every force in her world was arranged to make her stop. She had walked into a room full of people who had already decided what she was, walked out having shown them exactly who she had always been. Not the verdict, not the repainted sign, full calendar, or the customers coming back, or the young woman with her own tools standing in a doorway, asking for a chance. That was the thing that could never be taken from her. She had earned it herself, every single piece of it, with her own hands.